Welcome back, everybody. We're trying to finish up reinforcement basics here, and I'm going to try to do a little juggle here and move to another PowerPoint in this video. So we're going to finish up reinforcement with one more bit of information. And reinforcers, we talked about positive, negative, primary, and secondary, but remember reinforcers can also be immediate reinforcers or delayed reinforcers. Now, people have a tendency to be more likely to work hard to bring about immediate reinforcers as opposed to delayed reinforcers. And that makes sense. We're more likely to do something we like that provides an immediate pleasant consequence than have to wait for our consequences. An example might be we're more likely to play a video game that provides immediate pleasure versus working on a project that isn't due until next week, so the reinforcement doesn't come for at least a week. So video games provides immediate reinforcement, whereas studying might provide delayed reinforcement. And that's why it's so hard to put off immediate reinforcement for delayed reinforcement. And we might notice that as people are more impulsive, they go for immediate reinforcement. And as people develop impulse control or EQ, for example, or their central executive system becomes more well-defined, that they will work harder for delayed reinforcement that probably brings about a greater level of reinforcement. So for practice, you can do this at home, and we'll talk about it in class. Suppose that Jamarcus was complaining to the teacher. You guys can finish this up. I'll give you some other practice questions at home, so you might want to pause here and remember to jot down any notes or questions that you may have. We're going to move on now to another set of PowerPoints. That means we're going to talk about schedules of reinforcement here as I roll through my PowerPoints here. And we move to schedules of reinforcement. Again, pause if you need to, use your notes, and be sure to rewind if you need to. Our objective here at the end of this is, can you describe the 4 schedules of reinforcement and give examples of each? This is a very sophisticated part of reinforcement and often causes problems for people, so make sure you study this, work with somebody else if you need to, and identify the effect that each schedule has on the rate of responding or the rate of behavior. Our key terms here are ratio schedules, interval schedules, fixed schedules, which means set and predetermined, or variable schedules, which means unpredictable and on average. So Skinner studied operant conditioning in something called an operant chamber, and Skinner followed Thorndike. Skinner studied Thorndike, but instead of using instrumental learning, he used operant conditioning, basically suggesting that our behavior is much like a surgeon's scalpel. Our behavior operates on the environment to bring about what we want to get or to get away from what we want to get away from. And he used an operant chamber, or something referred to as a Skinner box, which is really kind of like a souped-up aquarium where Skinner could watch rats learn to lever press for food, or pigeons pressing for food as well. And remember, in this box, in these contraptions, Skinner controlled all the variables: the light, the temperature, the amount of food, when they could get food, water, etc. And he kept data, such as how long time passed before lever pressing, or the number of responses that a rat or a pigeon would exhibit in order to bring about food or another pleasurable consequence. Which brings us to schedules of reinforcement, because Skinner studied these with his rats and pigeons and identified different rates of responding, because reinforcement doesn't always occur every time we do something in our environment naturally. So he wanted to study which schedules of reinforcement would be most efficient at bringing about a behavior. Remember, again, behavior doesn't always bring about reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement, however, means that behavior is reinforced after every single behavior. This is rare in real life, or at least in nature, but it's not uncommon. For example, every time we flip a light switch, the light comes on. That means every time we do the behavior, the light will come on, or we bring about the consequence. That doesn't mean it always comes on It just means when we do the behavior, the reinforcement happens. So it doesn't mean all the time, but rather every time. And the schedules are basically under intermittent reinforcement. Remain continuous reinforcement, consequence occurs every time. Intermittent reinforcement, like your intermittent wipers, they don't go on continuously. The rate varies, so reinforcement occurs at varying rates. And there's two major types. There's ratio schedules. This is very important. Ratio means reinforcement depends on or occurs after a certain number of responses. So you have to exhibit a certain number of behaviors to get the reinforcer. It might be 1, it might be 20. Interval schedules, intervals refers to time passing, a certain amount of time. So reinforcement depends on or occurs after a certain amount of time passes, and then reinforcement will occur after the next behavior. Let's explain those a little bit more thoroughly. Remember, ratio depends on a number of times. Maybe you have to do something 3 times to get reinforcement. Interval schedules depend on time passing. So let's look first at ratio schedules. Now remember, I talked about there's 2 types of ratio schedules. Fixed ratio means that a predictable number of behaviors have to occur before you get the reinforcer. For example, if you collect 5 coupons, you get $1 off the price of an item. So you get reinforcement after a set amount of behaviors occur. A child might receive an ice cream cone after she reads 5 books. She gets a free ice cream coupon. So we know when reinforcement happens, and we know how much behavior must occur before it happens. Reinforcement is contingent on a certain number of behaviors. 5 behaviors, 10 behaviors, 20 behaviors. This produces a high response rate because we know when reinforcement is going to happen, so we'll work hard for it. But it's also easiest to extinguish the behavior. I want you to think about extinction. We heard about this in classical conditioning. How would you extinguish an operant or a voluntary behavior response? Think about that. We'll get to that in a different video. Variable ratio, as you might guess, means that an unpredictable number of behaviors have to occur. So reinforcement is unpredictable, or it occurs after an average number of responses. It could be 2, then 10, then 15, then 1, then 8. Asking people out on dates might be reinforced on a variable ratio schedule. You might not know when somebody's going to say yes. You might have to ask 1 person. You might have to ask 6 people. Playing a slot machine or gambling usually produces a variable ratio reward. You don't get reinforced every time you pull that lever on that slot machine. It might be on average every 10 pulls, so you might get one after 5, after 6, after 30, after 2, and after 12. It produces a high rate of responses and is difficult to extinguish because you get just enough reinforcement and you can't predict when the next behavior will bring about reinforcement. So you just keep working at it. Maybe it's the next one, maybe it's the next behavior, maybe it's the next behavior. Other types of schedules involve interval schedules, which means it's not the number of behaviors that occurs, it's the amount of time that has to pass. Fixed, you can guess, is a certain amount of time that's predictable has to pass. That means that the first response, the first behavior that you exhibit after a set time passes, you're going to get reinforcement. And it's an equal amount of time between each reinforcement. For example, if you tune into your favorite weekly TV program on Thursday night at 8 o'clock, you'll get reinforcement for turning on that channel at that time. You can't bring it about faster or more quickly. You have to wait. Working for a paycheck every 2 weeks. You do a lot of work, but it doesn't matter how often you work. You get paid at the same time every month, so you know when it's coming. Variable interval schedules means you have to wait an unpredictable amount of time before your behavior brings about reinforcement. For example, you're not sure how long you're going to have to wait. Checking behavior. For example, did you get a text back from your friend that you sent in class? But you're not supposed to be texting in class. You're supposed to be paying attention, so stop looking at your phone. Sorry. Just had to get that out. So if you're checking, your phone every couple minutes, waiting for a response, it produces a steady rate. Well, not a steady rate, actually. It produces a less dramatic number of behaviors, okay? Waiting for college acceptance emails. You send out all your applications and then you have to wait. It doesn't matter how many times you check your computer for that letter. It will get there after an unpredictable amount of time passes, and then maybe you will get your approval. So variable interval schedules is unpredictable. Fixed interval is predictable. You know when it's going to bring about a response. So lever pressing rates in the Skinner box, we can actually graph and chart out the rates of responding. So this on the left is the number of responses, and on the horizontal we have the time in minutes. So notice the steepest rate of responding, that's how often they respond, is the variable ratio schedule. Once it's learned, at least, the rat or the pigeon will keep working. The gambler will keep pulling that lever because it doesn't know when the next behavior will bring about food or money. Fixed ratio, notice the slots or the marks here means when reinforcement happened, and for the fixed ratio, it's an equal distance between. So the organism, the pigeon, the rat, the person knows when reinforcement is going to happen, so it works at a steady rate. A variable interval schedule, once learned, produces a rate that's not quite as steep and rapid as fixed ratio. But the most interesting one here is the fixed interval. You're going to be asked about this on the AP test. It produces a scalped effect, kind of like a stepping effect. And notice the rate of responding drops down and increases right before reinforcement happens. And then once we get reinforcement after 5 minutes, the rate of responding drops down to nothing. But right around 3 or 4 minutes, we start to behave, the rat starts to press the lever a lot more frequently as if it anticipates that reinforcement could happen. This kind of shows cognition. So let's look again. Highest rate of responding is for variable ratio. The quickest training, however, is for fixed ratio, but it's also easiest to extinguish because if we expect reinforcement after a set number of behaviors and it doesn't happen, we're going to stop our behavior. This relates to extinction. Variable schedules are harder to extinguish once learned, and the most unique is the fixed interval that produces that scalp effect, which might show cognition or prediction or anticipation. So there you have it. That's the end of the schedule part of our video. So be sure to rewind if you need to and follow your notes and complete the reinforcement schedules portion on your study guide. See you soon.